A farmer walks through the terraced fields on the edge of the city, checking maize stalks that should be taller by now. The soil feels different beneath his feet, drier, harder. He returns home as the sun sets behind stone pyramids that tower over the jungle canopy. By the next planting season, his neighbor's family has left their home without explanation. The house sits empty, vines already creeping through the doorway. In the great plaza, merchants who once traded jade and cacao now argue over dwindling supplies. The reservoirs that have sustained the city for generations are lower than anyone can remember. Priests climb the steep temple stairs more frequently, performing rituals that once brought rain, but the ceremonies feel hollow now. Families begin gathering their possessions in silence, loading them onto their backs. The neighborhoods near the edges empty first, then those closer to the center. The sounds of the marketplace grow quieter each month. Children who grew up beneath the shadow of the great temples walk away without looking back. What had been the beating heart of the Maya world for centuries was being abandoned, and no one could say exactly when it had begun. This was Tikal in the 8th century, a civilization unraveling in slow motion. At its peak, around 700 AD, nearly 100 Ziwazhan people lived within and around this jungle metropolis. It was one of the largest cities in the ancient Americas, a center of political power, trade and religious authority that had dominated the Maya lowlands for generations. The city's influence extended across hundreds of miles, with vassal cities paying tribute and acknowledging Tikal's supremacy. But by 950 AD, the great plazas stood empty. The temples that once hosted elaborate ceremonies watched over silent courtyards. The collapse wasn't sudden. It was a cascading failure that took generations to complete. No army conquered Tikal, no fire consumed it. The city was abandoned by the very people who had built it, and the reasons why reveal something fundamental about the relationship between human ambition and environmental limits. To understand what happened, you need to see Tikal as it was before the collapse. The city didn't look like the vine-covered ruins that archaeologists would eventually discover. It was a bustling urban center, carved out of dense rainforest through generations of human labor. The central core covered more than 6 square miles, with massive pyramids rising above the jungle canopy, some reaching heights of over 200 feet. Temple 4, completed around 740 AD, was the tallest structure in the pre-Columbian Americas. These weren't primitive structures. They were engineered monuments built with astronomical precision, their orientations marking solstices and celestial events that guided the agricultural calendar. The Great Plaza served as the city's social and ceremonial heart. On ritual days, thousands gathered to witness ceremonies performed by priests and rulers who claimed direct communication with the gods. Life in Tikal was stratified, but interconnected. The elite lived in the central Acropolis, a complex of palace structures with multiple stories, interior courtyards, and elaborate decorations. Scribes recorded history on stone stelae, using one of the few fully developed writing systems in the ancient Americas. Artisans created intricate jade carvings and pottery. But the majority of Tikal's population were farmers, living in smaller stone and thatch structures on the city's periphery, tending fields and working on public construction projects during the agricultural off-season. The city functioned because of sophisticated infrastructure. Engineers had built reservoirs that captured rainwater during the wet season, storing it for the dry months when natural water sources disappeared. Causeways connected different sections of the city. The population depended on intensive agriculture, cleared jungle land, where crops were planted in cycles that gradually depleted the soil. The seeds of Tikal's collapse were planted in its success. As the population grew, the city expanded deeper into the surrounding rainforest. More land was cleared for agriculture. More mouths needed feeding. The limestone bedrock that made grand construction possible created problems for long-term sustainability. Limestone is porous. When it rains, water filters down quickly, which meant surface water was scarce. The Maya compensated by building those elaborate reservoir systems, but they couldn't see what was accumulating in the water over time. Modern archaeological analysis has revealed high concentrations of mercury, phosphates, and toxic algae in the ancient reservoir sediments. Some of this contamination came from natural sources, but much of it resulted from human activity: the plastering of buildings with lime, the processing of jade and cinnabar for ritual purposes, and the concentration of waste from tens of thousands of people. The water that sustained the city was slowly poisoning it. At the same time, deforestation was changing the local environment. Without tree cover, soil erosion accelerated. The topsoil that had accumulated over centuries washed away during seasonal rains. What remained was less fertile and less able to support intensive farming. The Maya understood agriculture deeply. They had sustained large populations for centuries, but they couldn't reverse the cumulative environmental damage their own success had created. The turning point came gradually, then all at once. Around the mid-8th century, the climate shifted. Paleoclimatological data shows that the Maya lowlands experienced a series of prolonged droughts between 750 and 950 AD. These weren't total droughts. Rain still fell, but the seasonal patterns became unpredictable and the overall precipitation declined. For a civilization that depended on carefully timed planting cycles and stored rainwater, even small changes had outsized consequences. The reservoirs that had always refilled began running low. Agricultural yields dropped. The surplus that had supported Tikal's elite classes, its artists, priests, and bureaucrats, started to disappear. In response, the rulers did what had always worked before. They intensified ritual activity. More ceremonies were performed, more offerings were made, more sacrifices conducted. The logic made sense within their worldview. If the gods were displeased, greater devotion would restore balance. But when the rains didn't come and the harvests continued to fail, that logic began to break down. Political tensions that had simmered beneath Tikal's prosperity surfaced. The city had been defeated by rival Calakmul in 562 AD, a humiliation that had interrupted Tikal's dominance for over a century. By 700 AD, Tikal had recovered its power, but the memory of vulnerability remained. As resources became scarce, the elaborate trade networks that connected Maya cities began to fray. Cities that had once cooperated now competed for diminishing resources. The collapse unfolded in stages, each one reinforcing the next. As food became scarce, malnutrition weakened the population, making them more susceptible to disease. The contaminated water supplies likely contributed to illness, though people at the time would have attributed sickness to supernatural causes rather than environmental factors. Families faced impossible choices: stay in a city where food and water were unreliable, or leave for smaller settlements where life might be more sustainable. Many chose to leave. The exodus started at the periphery. Farmers who worked the outlying fields were the first to go, taking their knowledge and labor with them. As the agricultural workforce shrank, food production declined further, accelerating the crisis. The elite tried to maintain order and authority, but their power rested on their supposed ability to mediate between the human and divine realms. When their rituals failed to bring rain or restore prosperity, their legitimacy eroded. Construction of new monuments slowed, then stopped entirely. The last dated stela at Tikal was carved in 869 AD, marking the final time rulers felt confident enough to proclaim their achievements in stone. By the late 9th century, even the central areas of the city were being abandoned. The bureaucratic and religious apparatus that had organized society for centuries no longer had a population to govern or resources to sustain it. The knowledge systems that had made Tikal great, the astronomical calculations, the hieroglyphic writing, the architectural innovations, weren't forgotten in a single generation. But without functioning institutions to preserve and transmit them, they gradually faded. The consequences of Tikal's collapse extended far beyond the city itself. The classic Maya civilization, which had flourished across the lowlands for over 6 centuries, underwent a widespread transformation. Other major cities experienced similar abandonments during the same period. It wasn't the end of the Maya people; their descendants still live throughout Central America today, but it was the end of the centralized, urbanized civilization that had built cities like Tikal. The knowledge encoded in hieroglyphic texts was lost until modern archaeologists learned to decipher them in the 20th century. The jungle reclaimed the temples and plazas, covering them so completely that later Spanish conquistadors passed through the region without realizing vast cities lay hidden beneath the vegetation. When explorers rediscovered Tikal in the 19th century, they found a haunting paradox. Magnificent architecture built by a sophisticated civilization, abandoned for reasons that weren't immediately apparent. The story of Tikal's collapse offers a clear lesson about the fragility of complex societies when they exhaust the environmental systems that support them. Standing in the ruins of Tikal today, with howler monkeys calling from the jungle canopy and ancient pyramids rising from the forest floor, it's easy to see it as a distant historical curiosity. But the pattern that destroyed this city isn't unique to the ancient Maya. Civilizations throughout history have pushed their environments to the breaking point, often without recognizing the danger until it was too late. The difference is one of scale and speed. The Maya took centuries to create the conditions for their collapse. Modern societies with far more powerful technologies and far larger populations can create similar pressures in decades. The questions Tikal raises remain relevant. How do we know when we're pushing too far? What happens when the systems we depend on begin to fail? And can we see the warnings clearly enough to change course before we pass the point of no return? The answers matter, because the jungle that swallowed Tikal is patient, and history has a long memory.